I think we're recording. Yes. So welcome. We have 15 minutes with an American angel / Wonder Woman, Professor Angela Duckworth, who wrote this amazing book, The Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And we had our week one yesterday. We had a Zoom call with all the students, and we had some questions for you. But first, I wanted to do a quick intro. Besides being a math teacher, which is awesome, tell us a little bit about your background and maybe what you're up to.
Yeah, I'll make it brief because we don't have a lot of time. So I'm a psychologist and I study the psychology of effort and achievement. And I study that because when I was growing up, my dad would talk a lot about, who's the smartest person in the family. And he talked a lot about being gifted and talented. And I grew up to study all the things that my dad didn't talk a lot about, but I think are very important to doing things. Sorry, it's a little noisy here. I literally don't know what that is. And I think actually my dad embodied those things. My dad was really in love with his work and he worked really hard. So he was very gritty, even if he didn't, lecture me on grit.
I'm curious, what was your dad's profession?
My dad was a chemist and he worked for DuPont on car paint for most of his life.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so we had some quick questions for you. We are in the deal making in the entertainment industry class. And when we met last night, we had some interesting questions. So I thought I'd start off with one of our students asked about adaptability quotient, she said it's a relatively new concept. It's in Chinese, I guess. And she said there's a name for it in Chinese. I'm not sure what it is, but I was curious if you've heard of it and does that relate to grit?
Okay, I don't know what it is. So I think I should probably pass on only because I'll just start making things up, but I've never heard about it. It's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, and I'll ask her to email us and follow up with you the origins of the word and what it means. And then we had another question, a really great one about mental health and grit. When it comes to neurodivergent populations, for example, ADHD, and how that can affect the grit score. And if you've taken that into account, how have you done that?
Yeah, I thought about ADHD when I was just starting out in studying grit, because I study something else too, which also has to do with the psychology of effort, and that is self-control. Your ability to regulate your emotions, your impulses, and your thoughts in order to pursue your goals. And so self-control and grit sound like they're the same thing. They sound like, one is just the extreme of the other. Maybe that grit's just the extreme of self-control, but I don't think that's true. I think as a scientist now, I can say that grit and self-control are both about effort, but self-control is really your ability to, regulate these like momentary, urges to feel, to think, or to do a certain thing. And grit is really about a completely different time scale, like over years and decades, like what are you doing? And some of the grittiest people that I have studied actually have a diagnosis of ADHD and aren't so great at like short-term, momentary, like, oh, can I keep my attention over here and not watch the basketball game? Or, can I resist this like free donut that was like in front of me? So I think self-control and grit are not the same thing, even though there's some overlap. And I absolutely think that in terms of neurodivergent populations or people who have, I've interviewed paragons of grit who have obsessive compulsive disorder, who have told me about, lots of, different ways that people's brains and minds work. And I think that, the ability to pursue something that you care about and to just like wake up every day and like really try to work on it, I think that's available to all of us, really.
And that kind of brings us to the next question, which is about long-term goals versus short-term and how grit affects that. And I think you kind of just got into that about even if you have a diagnosis of ADHD, it seems like you can still be gritty when it comes to long-term. But how does that affect the short-term goals, or grit?
Yeah, it's really important to say that when I talk about people pursuing long-term goals, I mean, say you're, Lindsey Vonn, and I don't remember how old she was, but she decided she wanted to be in the Olympics and she wanted to win a gold medal in skiing. It was like a decade. I think that there was like a 10-year plan that her dad and her made. And, sometimes people say like, I'm going to work on social justice, like probably to my dying day. And I don't actually have the illusion or the myth that like I've solved it so there are these super long-term goals that people work toward, and that is what grit is. But I do want to say something very important, which is that they're actually working on it every day, meaning what they do is they break down these big goals into parts, right? So for example, one reason I'm excited to have this conversation is that I have a long-term goal. And I think the most succinct way to put is actually even shorter than what I wrote in the book, which is just to increase psychological wisdom. Like if there were a psychologically wise adult in the life of every child, I truly think the world would be a more peaceful, green, equitable, and prosperous place, and a happier place. So I want to increase psychological literacy. That's a long-term goal. It's super abstract. So I have to like wake up every day and actually work on the pieces of it, right? It's like have a call with Pamela and her students, like, revise the chapter that I'm working on, like read these papers. So I want to say that grit is about long-term goals, but every high achiever that I've studied learns how to break long-term goals into pieces, and the pieces are shorter term. And that's what you end up working on, in the morning and in the afternoon, sometimes on the weekends and in the evenings too.
Interesting. I think I love your new why, right? Your why is psychological wisdom and literacy for the world.
Exactly.
So I love that. And I'm so grateful that reading your book and you being here. And when we talk in class, a lot of people didn't know what grit was. So it's exposing, master's students in the entertainment program to grit. So we're so grateful that you're doing this and you are making a difference for all of us. And the people taking this class today, a lot of them had no idea. That brings us to the grit test you devised, the 12 questions, which we had our students take. And one of the questions was, why was half flipped? So remember, why was that?
So these are what psychologists call reverse scored items, because whatever your score is, it's like you flip it before you tally it up. And so the question would be like, why, that you're asking me. And it's a very good question. I love the curiosity. So I guess the reason, not even one reason, when I first wrote the scale, I had these passion items that were like, I can stay interested in one thing for a long time, or I have something that's really important to me that I want to stick with. And so like those would not be reverse scored, right? So like, why not use those? But I found that people basically were like, yes, right? So that everybody was like scoring maximum. And I think everybody could think of a thing. They'd be like, well, I'm still Christian, so I guess yes, right? Or like, it's like, I guess I have the same dog, so like, sure. And I think that's not what I meant. So there's something about the reverse coding items that gets a little bit closer. But by the way, this scale I wrote as, I think, a first-year graduate student, and it's not great, but I was a first-year graduate student, so I'm not saying that the scale is perfect, but that's why. And I don't think I've ever told anybody that, so, glad you asked me.
Well, it's like a pattern interrupt kind of, maybe, right? You get into a pattern answering tests, and then you kind of.
That may be also, Pamela, that might be it also, because it's like, then some, you're not just going like straight lining. That may be also part of it. Yeah. I never really made another like serious attempt at a scale since then. So I don't really know if I could have come up with like a different one, which would have been even better. Probably, I'm sure I could have. Yeah, but I never did.
That's grit. We all learn, right? It's all good, and we're grateful.
All good. Hashtag Kaizen. Yeah, exactly.
It's opening the conversation, and the next generation of students, the people after us, they're going to be able to say, "Hey, wait a minute, maybe
I did a better job."
So the other question I have is, you took the grit test. I'm sure we have about 3 minutes left. Has your grit changed over the years, and why or why not, do you think?
I think my grit has changed over the years, right? And I don't think the grit scale is like the best thermometer of like grit changing over time. It's not that sensitive of an instrument, but I feel like if I thought about my 20s, I mean, I was always a hard worker, but I have learned a lot about growth mindset. And I have definitely learned the thing that I think is the hardest thing for students of the age that we're, speaking to today, which is, I'm sure you're hard workers. I'm sure you have a tremendous work ethic. I'm sure you're actually probably like fairly open to feedback and advice. I'm sure you're pretty resilient. I think the thing that you probably struggle with most is like the specific direction in which to take a passion, right? So if you could ask someone like for a magic wand and be like, can you just tell me what my calling is? And like, cause I'll work hard and I'll do it. That's how I felt when I was in my 20s, like my whole 20s, in fact, early 30s too. So I will say that over time, because now I'm 52, I have, become more and more committed to increasing psychological wisdom and writing as my contribution. Maybe, whenever I'm on a scientific team, people are not like, get Angela to run the really fancy statistic models. They're always like, get Angela to rewrite the introduction, right? So I think I've kind of learned that, but it was not in my 20s. If you asked me in my 20s, like, what are you doing? I'd be like, I don't know. Oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. So if you struggle more with passion for long-term goals than you struggle with perseverance, then you are like every Wharton MBA student I've taught and every recent Ivy League graduate I've taught. Like, it's very common, and it was just like me. And I think if you could just recognize A, it's normal. B, as long as you're like still like trying something and like journaling at night and being like, is this working for me? Like, you will figure it out, but it could take years. And I didn't realize that. I just felt so bad. I was like, oh, everybody else figured it out. Why do I not know? And, honestly, I don't think very many people have figured it out in their young adulthood.
And don't forget your new Pushkin podcast, which is awesome, right?
Oh, No Stupid Questions with Freakonomics
Yes.
podcast. Yeah, Stephen Dubner.
It is so great. So not only you're doing introductions, now you're an amazing podcaster. And I'm sure that wasn't in your...
I definitely did not anticipate that because podcasts did not, that's how old I am. Podcasts didn't exist.
And your pivot. So we have about 1 minute left. I wanted to ask you vis-a-vis negotiations, because that's what we're learning is deal making. Mm-hmm. One of the secrets, I think, the secret sauce is the ability to just walk away, which is the antithesis of grit. It's mm-hmm. not like going back to trying to, at some point.
Pamela, I'm glad we're ending with this a question, because it's really important. When to grit and when to quit. Here's the advice I have, right? When I say like be gritty, I mean like don't give up on some long-term goal or dream you have because you're having a bad day or a bad week or even like a bad month or year. Like, okay, so that's where to be gritty. Like, I'm not going to give up on increasing psychological wisdom, even if I write a shitty second book, like even if I get rejected 5 times in a row, like even if I make a mistake and I'm like, dumb about something. But where I am going to quit is like, say a particular paper is not going well or a project or a negotiation. Like, you have to actually quit quickly, even if you're going to be loyal in the long term. So it's a great question to end on, Pamela. Grit shouldn't be applied to like, well, I guess I better eat this bowl of soup no matter what. It's like, well, if it has a fly in it, don't eat it.
That was perfection. When to grit and when to quit. Your new book.
So, write it.
Thank you. We're so grateful for your time and energy and enthusiasm. And hopefully we'll meet in person one fine day.
I would love that. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Your time is as precious as mine. Thank you so much.
Right, have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you, Samira. Thank you, Dakota. And thank you, Hannah. All right. Bye, Pamela.
Bye.